I have prepared some notes which are on my website. All you really need to write down is the address of the web page, pwaldron.info/uppercase TCD lowercase beginners, because I did something similar for the second year of this course before Christmas. It's case sensitive, so make sure you put the TCD in uppercase and the beginners in lowercase. I'm going to record it and hopefully get it up on YouTube at some stage if you want to listen back a second time. How many people here have sent off DNA swabs or spit to one of the DNA companies? Only a handful. Ancestry DNA? 4 or 5. Family tree DNA? A couple of people that I know already. 23andMe? MyHeritage? A couple of MyHeritages? Or Living DNA? No, did I leave anyone else out? So hopefully I'll... GEDmatch. Well, you have to be in one of the others first to be in GEDmatch. Which if you're there, that's brilliant. That's where you should be. Hopefully by the end of the class I will have persuaded everybody that they should do it. I actually have some kits from Family Tree DNA which will save you a few dollars because you don't have to pay the $12 shipping and you get $10 off the price, so it's $69. So we can talk about that at the end of class if anyone is interested. The outline of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try and put genetic genealogy in the context of what you've been learning in the rest of this course. Then I'm going to talk about some basic definitions, the different components of your DNA, the paths through your family tree along which you inherit those components, how DNA occasionally mutates. If it didn't mutate, we would all be absolutely identical and have the same DNA and it would be no use to us. How the DNA that we get from our fathers and our mothers recombines. Then I will run through some of the features of the DNA websites, and I'm going to end up with a case study that I've been working on lately, which illustrates all the wonderful things that you can discover by looking at your DNA and your relatives' DNA. And if anybody has any questions at any point during the lecture, feel free to shout and stop me. Can you read that, or do you want it slightly bigger? That better? That better? I could hardly read it on the screen here. You're the expert on your own family history for several reasons. You have the oral tradition that's been passed down to you. Hopefully you have the paper records in the attic or somewhere else if they haven't been thrown out in the skip at some stage. And you have your family DNA in every cell in your body. And those three sources are enormously valuable to you in researching your family history. But what you have to do as family historians is try to reconcile those sources with each other and with the public information like the census returns and the land records and the church records and the birth, marriage and death records that you've been hearing about in the rest of this course. What is genetic genealogy? Well, I said I go to Wikipedia for the definition. It is the use of DNA testing in combination with traditional genealogical methods to infer relationships between individuals and to find ancestors. I hate the use of the word testing because I'm a statistician by training, and in statistics we do hypothesis testing, and it's all very rigorous and well defined, and what the DNA companies are selling to you is not nearly as rigorous and well defined as a good statistician would like it to be. You have to do the work. You have to come up with the hypothesis that you want to test, and then you have to use the combination of the oral evidence, the paper evidence, and the DNA evidence to test whether that hypothesis is sensible or not. And there's a lovely online tool now called WATO, W-A-T-O, what are the odds? And you can actually feed it in DNA information and it will come back with odds information properly statistically computed for you to tell you which is the more likely of several hypotheses that you might have. The first thing I say to anybody doing genealogy, and especially people doing genetic genealogy, is put your family tree into a database format. How many people use something like Ancestral Quest or Roots Magic or Family Tree Maker or any of those other things? How many have not tried to do that yet? It's time to start. I think there's the topic for next week, which is along the lines of putting a tree together. But if you want to use the DNA websites productively, you have to have at least the information on your direct ancestors in an electronic form that you can upload to all the DNA websites to go with your DNA data, and then the websites will compare family trees and DNA data and will be much more useful to you if both pieces of information are there available for comparison. So this is my pedigree chart in Ancestral Quest. Myself at the left, my parents in the second column, my grandparents in the third column, my great-grandparents in the next column, great-great-grandparents, and then arrows off to the right to go back even more generations. Ancestral Quest. And there are links from the web page to the websites of all these companies: Ancestral Quest, Roots Magic, Reunion, Family Tree Builder, and Wikipedia has a long, long list. There are dozens and dozens of these programs that you can use. And a good one will be able to import and export your information in a format called GEDCOM. So if you start with one and you don't like it, you don't have to start all over again. You save your work to a GEDCOM file, and you try another program, and you import the GEDCOM file that you have saved. And the same principle works with the DNA websites. You save what you put together as a GEDCOM file, and then you upload it to the DNA website. And it searches for other people that share your DNA and share your ancestral surnames.
Are they all online?
Most of those now, I think you just download them and install them.
But do you then put them onto your computer and you don't work online?
I recommend that you keep it on your own computer, as long as you keep good backups, as you should do with anything you have on your own computer. If you have lightning fast broadband, and if you have enormous faith in the companies providing the online storage for family trees, by all means keep it on Ancestry or MyHeritage or one of those. But I'm not a big fan of any of them. And if they go out of business tomorrow, your whole family tree is gone. I don't expect Ancestry will go out of business tomorrow, but it might close down part of its operations. I use Ancestral Quest because I started back in 1987 with my very first 286 PC with a program called Personal Ancestral File, which has evolved into Ancestral Quest. If I was starting from scratch, I might not start where I am today. I know people who swear by Reunion. That's a Macintosh program if you use a Mac. I know other people who swear by Roots Magic. Anyone here want to recommend anything else? Family Tree Maker. Problem with Family Tree Maker was it was owned by Ancestry, and they decided they were going to abandon it. And another company luckily took it over. So that's why I hesitate to recommend it. But I have used it, and it does everything that the others do.
Excuse me, would you mind if I move the bag? It's just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Never even thought of that. That better.
Thank you.
Um,
Can I just ask the one you recommended for Mac users?
Reunion.
Reunion.
Yeah, and it also runs on the iPhone. I use it on my iPhone, but I have to get a friend with a Mac to do the conversion between my Windows computer and my iPhone.
And the tree makers don't come back as well now.
A lot of them work on both. Ancestral Quest is both a Mac and a Windows version as well. So you can have your own website. I have a website run with different software called TNG, the next generation. And I've blown that up a little bit too much. No, I shouldn't change that because I'll change the scale of the other. So you can upload your stuff to a website even if your master copy is on your own device at home. And the good software will print out your family history book for you as well. It will have free-form notes fields where you can write notes about your ancestor, and where you can put in information about DNA matches to keep track of your DNA matches. So that's just a by-the-by, nothing to do with genetic genealogy. What I want to start to say about genetic genealogy, we're the first generation to have created digital records of our DNA. How we all wish that our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents had left us their DNA, and then we could take the family trees back much further. So think of your descendants and do unto them as you wish your ancestors had done unto you, and leave them a record of your DNA. There is a new company in Australia called To the Letter DNA, and it is trying to extract DNA samples from envelope seals and stamps on old letters. So if you have a letter written by your great-grandmother, and if the great-grandmother licked it and licked the stamp, rather than giving it to somebody else to mail or putting her finger under the tap and wetting it that way, you might get her DNA back that way, but that is far more expensive than the run-of-the-mill commercial genetic genealogy services. There are several big companies, as I've already asked you about, collecting DNA, and this is a recent chart showing you the size of their databases. Ancestry DNA now has about 15 million people. Family Tree DNA is down at the bottom with about 1 million. The grey one is GetMatch, is about the same. 23andMe, I think, is the blue one, is up around 5 million. MyHeritage is up around 2.5 million. So there are probably upwards of 20 million people available for you to compare your DNA with between all these websites. So it is one of your most valuable genealogical sources. Not using your DNA is like saying I'm not going to use census returns because I don't believe in censuses. It's that silly. So I really think anybody who wants to find out anything about their ancestors should be in these DNA databases. There's one caveat. It has let the genie out of the bottle as regards family secrets. If there's an adoption or some other secret like that in your family, it's going to come out eventually. The only way to stop it coming out is to stop every member of your immediate and extended family from putting their DNA in these DNA comparison databases. The case study that I'm going to talk about later is about a man who ran off in 1909 or 1910, well, he did it twice. But he's been caught out because his grandchildren and great-grandchildren are in the DNA databases. And they found out what happened 120 years ago. But his secret was safe for the 120 years when people were not comparing their DNA in online databases. So I'm going to try and tell you as quickly as I can in 50 minutes some of the methods you can use to exploit the DNA source, just like Fiona's been teaching you methods to exploit the census sources and the birth, marriage, and death sources. And you will find yourself in new communities of people who are DNA matches, but the common ancestor might be just before the brick wall in your family tree. They might be your fourth or fifth cousins, and with our state of our Irish records, it's very hard to confirm a fourth or fifth cousin relationship, but eventually you might do it. You can also join DNA projects if you're with Family Tree DNA. It runs geographically based projects. Probably about half the counties in Ireland now have some sort of geographically based project. I co-administer the one for County Clare. There's a link to the one for County Kerry. I have over 1,200 members in the County Clare one. You can also join Surname Projects based on your surname or the surname of any ancestor that you're interested in. And then the last type of project you won't be joining at the very beginning until you get your results back. That's haplogroup-based projects. You've probably heard of the tales of Niall of the Nine Hostages. Who has heard of Niall of the Nine Hostages? Most of you. He lived in, about the 4th or 5th century, and he is believed to be the male line ancestor of probably half of the men in the northwest of Ireland. Similarly, the Dalcassians, Brian Boru and his relatives, are the male line ancestors of a lot of people in the southwest of Ireland, and these are some of the main Irish Y-DNA haplotypes, which men only can identify from their Y chromosome, which I'll come to in a minute, and they're given these strange names like M222 for Niall of the Nine Hostages and L226 for Brian Boru and the Dalcassians, or simpler things like Irish type 1, Irish type 2, Irish type 3, and only men will be joining those because only men have a Y chromosome, and you won't know which one to join until you get your first results back. So, what is DNA? It's short for deoxyribonucleic acid, a big word which you never need to mention again. It is made up of 4 chemical molecules: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Again, you don't need to know those words. You need a very small vocabulary. You just need to know that the DNA company takes your spit into a tube or your cheek swab, and it turns into a data file comprised of the letters A, C, G, and T. So the data file that comes back, again, you don't need to look at it, I'm just telling you what it looks like. It's like this in 4 columns. Each location in the DNA that varies from one person to another is given an RS identifier like this. We have 22 pairs of autosomal chromosomes. This is chromosome number 1 out of the 22. There are millions of locations on each chromosome. That number is the position on the chromosome. And the important thing is the 2 letters AA. That means I got an A from my father and an A from my mother at that first location on the first chromosome. I got a G from both parents there. I got an A from one parent and a G from the other parent there, and so on. So that's under the bonnet. We close the bonnet now and we'll talk about how actually to drive the car. What you can do with that data file is you can download it from the website of whichever company you spit or swab for, and then you can upload it to the other companies and you don't have to pay a second time to have the lab analysis done. So where does this DNA come from? We get it from our parents. It's largely the same as the DNA that our parents have, but there's enough random change at each generation that we're not all absolutely identical. We have about, I think it's 99% of our DNA in common with every other human being and 92% or something in common with the chimpanzees. But the companies look at the bits that vary from one human to another. So we all start out as a sperm fertilizing an egg. There's 2 types of sperm. Either the sperm has a Y chromosome and it creates a male child, or it has an X chromosome and it creates a female child. It also has 22 autosomal chromosomes, which line up with the 22 autosomal chromosomes that come in the egg from the mother. You have 22 pairs, 1 of each pair from the father, 1 of each pair from the mother. The egg also brings an X chromosome. So if you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes, 1 from your father, 1 from your mother. If you're a male, you have a Y from your father and an X from your mother. And the egg also brings the mitochondrial DNA. So we all have mitochondrial DNA, and it comes from our mothers. How does that come down through the pedigree? Just to give you a concrete example, here's me. I got my Y chromosome from my father. I also got my surname from him. He was a Waldron as well. He got his Y chromosome and his surname from his father. So the Y chromosome is in general associated with the surname, unless there's a surname DNA switch. And my Y DNA, in theory, is Waldron Y DNA, and it came from my great-great-grandfather Thomas Waldron, and from his unknown ancestors. I can't go back beyond him. The mitochondrial DNA comes to everyone from their mother. So mine came from my mother, who was Noreen Durkin, who got hers from her mother, who was Bridget Durkin, married to another Durkin, who got hers from her mother, who was Anne O'Neill, who got hers from her mother, who was Mrs. Mary Walsh, and I still don't know her maiden surname. So even though I've been at this for 40 years, I'm stuck as great-great-grandparents on both my Y-DNA line and my mitochondrial DNA line. The autosomal DNA, I got 50% of it from my father, 50% from my mother. On average, each of the 4 grandparents contribute 25%, each of the 8 great-grandparents contributes 12.5%, each of the 16 great-great-grandparents contributes 6.25%. So your autosomal DNA contains decreasing amounts from each ancestor as you go back through the generations. Comparing autosomal DNA will identify relations who could be on any side of your family. Comparing Y-DNA will identify relations whose common ancestor is in the direct male line and in theory should have the same surname. Comparing mitochondrial DNA will identify relatives who are in the direct female line. But the problem down here is for most people, every generation you go back in the direct female line, the surname changes. I guess I'm lucky that my grandmother didn't change her surname because she married a man with the same surname. But in most cases, you'll have 5 different surnames on the bottom line there. So that's roughly the inheritance paths. There's the summary. The DNA that comes from the father only to males only is the Y chromosome. DNA that comes equally from both sides are the autosomal chromosomes. The X chromosomes are used in specialized studies, so I'm not going to talk about them today. And the mitochondrial DNA comes to everyone from the mother and the mother's mother and the mother's mother's mother and so on. If you go to Ancestry DNA or MyHeritage DNA, all that they look at is the autosomal DNA that comes 50% from each side. And that's what allows them to give you what percentage of your ancestry they stick particular ethnicity labels on. Irish or Greek or German or Spanish or whatever label they want to stick on it. Y-DNA was actually commercialized first about 10 or 15 years before autosomal DNA, and that has been used for surname studies. I'm giving a talk to the clans of Ireland in a couple of weeks' time, and a lot of those clans have set up DNA projects to go with the surname clan over the last 20 years. Mitochondrial and xDNA are not for the beginner's course. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the types of mutations that happen, because this is important when we're looking at the Y chromosome. A mutation is like a transcription error. Your parent might have an A, and for some reason, instead of getting the A from the parent, it mutates into a G when you're born, or a C, as I said in that example. There's two particular types that we look at. One is a short tandem repeat. There are often cases where there might be 3 or 4 letters that repeat over and over again. So there's a string of CCTG, CCTG, CCTG repeating, and quite often that will mutate. It'll change from 7 repeats to 8 repeats or 6 repeats. And 2 people who have the same mutation are going to be more closely related than 2 people who don't have the same mutation. The other possibility is just 1 letter changes. And that can happen quite often, but on the Y chromosome it has been found there have been many cases where there's been a single nucleotide polymorphism, we just call it SNP for short, where 1 letter has changed. And that change has been passed on from the man who had the original mutation to his sons and his grandsons and his great-grandsons and his great-great-grandsons. They all have the mutation that this single ancestor had. Nobody else in the world has that mutation. So that makes it very easy to divide men into trees based on SNP mutations. We have surname projects which look at both the STR and the SNP mutations. Let's look at some of the STR mutations first. This is the Durkin surname project. That's my mother's maiden surname. This is run by Family Tree DNA. The first column is just the kit number. The second column is the surname. You'll see they're mostly Durkins with various different spellings mutate the same way as DNA mutates. To help people researching, you should put in your most distant known male line ancestor with some dates and some places. As you can see, the first 2 people have left it blank. Some people haven't put any places, but everybody who knows a Durkin knows it's a Mayo or a Sligo name, and it's no surprise that all the locations given there are Mayo and Sligo. The haplogroup column gives you details of a SNP mutation. That's the single location that changes. Then these are the STR mutations, the one that change back and forth more often from 7 to 6 or 8. And it highlights here the ones that are different from the norm. But all the Durkins have the same values for the first 7 or 8. And then there's one Durkin down here that has a 15 where everyone else has a 14. And some of them mutate more frequently than others. The color coding tells you how frequently they mutate and whether it's an up or down mutation. So again, that's just to show you what surname projects do. I don't expect you to understand all that at the end of one beginner's lecture. Started out looking at 12 of those STR markers. Now everybody is doing at least 37. Most people are doing 111, and the state of the art is looking at 700 of those markers. The Y chromosome has millions and millions of locations, and even those that change from generation to generation are in the many hundreds. And what you want to do when you look at that row of STR numbers is see how many differences there are across the row. I shouldn't have closed that. So each coloured square is a difference from the mode. The closer you are to genealogically to somebody else, the fewer differences there are in your STR signature. You want to find 0 genetic distance for somebody who's very closely related to you. If somebody has 40 differences out of 111, your common ancestor was many thousands of years ago. If there's 0 out of 111 differences, your common ancestor is probably in the last 5 or 6 or 7 generations. So that's genetic distance. The smaller the distance between 2 men, the more closely they're related. And the SNP mutations have been used to build up a haplotree. When this started about 20 years ago, they thought that there were only about 20 different Y chromosomes that they were going to find. They didn't even need all the letters of the alphabet. And it goes back to what they call the Y Adam, the only man alive in his time who has male line descendants living today. Not quite the same thing as the biblical Adam. And then one of his descendants had a mutation, and the A branch branched off from all the other letters, and then there was another mutation, and B branched off from all the other letters. And then they got to war, and they thought we were done. Now there are hundreds of thousands of these mutations, and a very sophisticated tree on the Family Tree DNA website, which takes forever to load up because it's got 16,000 branches, 118,000 variants, and 160,000 confirmed mutations from the Y-DNA database. And eventually it loads up and you can click to navigate back and forth through it. So there's your original A to OR haplogroups, and now there's an S and a T, but within OR there's many sub-branches, and you can click on those letters to expand the sub-branches down along. So if you're a man and you send your cheek swabs to Family Tree DNA and you pay the appropriate price, they will tell you what your SNP and STR mutations are and where you fit into the tree of mankind. It associates people with the same surname who have common ancestors within the surname era, which only goes back about 1,000 years. The O'Briens claim they have the oldest surname in the world, that it meant grandson of Brian Boru. We know Brian Boru died at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. So that's roughly the surname era. But you will have similar Y-DNA maybe to people with another surname whose common ancestor is 1,500 or 2,000 years ago. So it tells you not only the history of your own surname, but what surnames are genetically related to it. So in theory, the Kennedys and the O'Briens should have similar Y-DNA because Brian Boru's father was Canadic and he's the ancestor of the Kennedys. And every surname is going to have other genetically related surnames. And eventually, down at the bottom of the tree, they managed to find SNP mutations which are specific to a single surname. So this is a website called the Big Tree, and this is part of the Brian Boru Dalcashian North Munster collection of surnames. And all these mutations over here have only been found in men called O'Malley and Malley. The spelling has mutated slightly from Malley with one L and no O to O'Malley, or vice versa. But these mutations are specific to that surname. These are specific to the Curry surname. O'Hara and Heher, probably a spelling mutation, and they have all those DNA mutations that are specific to that surname. Here we've an O'Loughlin and a Griffin. Well, that's probably a surname DNA switch within the surname era, because they have the same mutations. Same thing here, but over here we have, most of these people are McNamaras, so these are mutations that only some of the McNamaras have, and this one up at the top, DC189, all the McNamaras seem to have. So you can even tell from your SNP mutation which branch of the McNamaras you come from, because you have a mutation that some McNamaras have and other McNamaras don't have. Any McNamara in the room? No. My grandmother was a McNamara, which is why I'm interested in that. So the autosomal DNA mutations are, we have 22 autosomal chromosomes. For some reason that I don't understand, getting your 22 pairs of autosomal chromosomes analyzed costs about half as much as getting single Y chromosome analyzed, and about 10% as much as getting the most sophisticated analysis of your Y chromosome. Most of our autosomal DNA doesn't vary. Only about 0.02% of the total amount of autosomal DNA is of any genealogical information. And that's what they pick out to look at. If you printed out your whole genome as a book of A's, C's, G's, and T's, the book would fill this whole room. And it would be a pretty big computer file as well if you just stored it on your computer. I'm going to say a little bit about how autosomal DNA recombines between the father and the mother. So I've used blue for the father, red for the mother. So this might be one of the father's chromosomes, GTAC, GAT, etc. in blue. This might be one of the mother's long string of G's, ACA, blah, blah, blah. And whenever an egg or a sperm is created, the paternal and maternal chromosomes cross over and recombine. So it might start off with this string of blue letters that come from the father's side, and then there's a string of red letters that come from the mother's side, and then it crosses over and there's a string of blue letters that comes from the father's side, and then it crosses over and there's a string of red letters that comes from the mother's side. It doesn't happen nearly as often as that illustration would suggest. On average, there's one crossover per 19,000 letters, not per 19 letters as in that stylized example. So it's not the scale. So you're going to find when you compare autosomal chromosomes, the problem is that the technology can't say this is the father's side and this is the mother's side. It can't separate the two sides. So you're looking for what's called half-identical regions, where there's a long string where there's where you can't say that you're not related, and eventually you work out there has to be a relationship there. I'm not going to go into the details. The important thing is this is measured in units called genetic length, or centimorgans, after a geneticist called Morgan. And the number of centimorgans on which you match another person tells you how closely you're related. The longer the genetic length of the shared DNA, the closer the relation. So this is the opposite way around to the Y chromosome, where the shortest genetic distance between two men is the closest relationship. The longest genetic length of the shared DNA is the closest relationship. So I'll just show you this little table, which I like. I probably need to blow it up a little bit for you. There are group A up to group J, different relationships which share different amounts of DNA. Group A is full siblings. Group B includes grandparent-grandchild relationships, but it also includes uncle-nephew, uncle-niece, aunt-niece, aunt-nephew relationships. It also includes half-sibling relationships. They're going to share similar amounts of DNA. The next group is first-cousin relationships. The next group is first-cousin once-removed relationships, which also includes half-first cousins and similar relationships, and so on. So if you find that you share with somebody anything between 2,400 and 3,200 centimorgans, that means with probability 1, that's your full sibling. If you share between about 2,000 and 2,400, that's an ambiguous result. It might be a full sibling, or it might be a half sibling, uncle, aunt, grandparent, grandchild. If you look at the person's ages, you can tell pretty quickly which of those it is. If the two people are 2 years apart in age, they're not going to be grandfather and grandchild. It's unlikely they're uncle and nephew. It's much more likely that they're half siblings. If you're between about 1,500 and 2,000, then you know for certain you're one of those group B relationships. If the amount shared is between 1,000 and 1,500, it might be group B, the half-sibling relationship, or it might be group C, the first-cousin relationship. If you're around 1,000, it's certainly in the first-cousin category. And then as you go down further, there might be 3 or 4 possibilities. And eventually, when you get down under 100, it can be a very distant relationship. You can still share 80 or 90 centimorgans with a 5th or 6th cousin. So there's a strong correlation between the genetic length of the shared DNA and the actual relationship, but it's not perfect, except in a few cases up at the top of the table, like the full siblings and the half siblings. And even then, some full siblings and some half siblings will get ambiguous results. And there's a couple of other links there to show you other tools for looking at that information. So I'm going to quickly run over the DNA websites because I've only about 13 minutes left. Gedmatch.com is the best website in my opinion. It doesn't run a laboratory. It just takes your data file, which you download from the laboratory website and upload to the GEDmatch website. All the others use laboratories. Family Tree DNA is used by, its laboratory is used by MyHeritage. So they have cheek swabs. You rub up and down the inside of your cheek like a little cotton bud. Ancestry, you spit into a test tube and they get the DNA out of your saliva. Over at the left is Living DNA, which is a British-based company which isn't really up and running yet, but it's threatening to get there at this stage, so I won't bother scrolling over to that. You can upload your data to GetMatch, to Family Tree, or to MyHeritage. You can't upload to Ancestry or 23andMe. If you want to be in their databases, you have to pay them. Obviously, you're not going to download your data from GetMatch because it doesn't have a lab. It only does uploads, but you can download the data from any of the others. You can upload your family tree to any of them except 23andMe. You can actually edit your family tree on the Family Tree DNA website, but that's not a very clever thing to do because you can't download it and you have to rewrite it if you want to use it anywhere else. They all do cousin matching. There's approximate customer numbers. The Facebook chart that I showed you earlier shows they've even grown since I did that. Prices vary a little bit. Family Tree DNA for the basic autosomal test is $79. The Y-DNA test is $130 and up. And that's a one-off payment. You never have to pay them again. Ancestry, at the moment, it's $99 US, but you have to have an ongoing annual subscription to get full use out of it. MyHeritage has a Mother's Day sale for €59 at the moment. But again, to get full use out of it, you have to have an annual subscription. 23andMe, if you don't want all their health-related information, is €99. And if they match you with a potential cousin, GetMatch or Family Tree will give you the cousin's email, and you can start communicating by email immediately, which is great. The others have internal messaging system. 23andMe, you can even appear and refuse to be contacted. And we won't worry about the other little details at the bottom. Quick look at the websites. Genesis.getmatch.com. There's only one person I think said he used GetMatch over Christmas. It switched over to a new matching algorithm and a new database. So you have to make sure that you go to genesis.getmatch.com or you don't get the full value. And there's the login page, and when you log in, you see this main menu screen. And down here are all the things that you can do. You can look up other users by their email address. If you know somebody's email and you want to see if they're in there, you put in the email address. Or you can look up by the kit number. When you upload, you get a kit number. So there's my kit numbers and those of all the people whose kits I manage. And if I click on that, it shows my 3,000 closest relatives in the database. Tells me the kit number, tells me the name, the email address, and how much DNA we share. So the top two are duplicates of myself. One is a legacy from the old matching database, and I spat for Ancestry and I swabbed for Family Tree DNA, and I uploaded them both to make sure they were the same. Probably shouldn't do that because it puts an extra load on the processing. The next one is my first cousin, my first cousin, my first cousin, my double second cousin once removed, my half first cousin once removed, my double third cousin once removed, my second cousin once removed, a lady who's adopted, and thanks to DNA, she's figured out who her parents were 80 years after she was adopted, but I still don't know how I'm related to her. It's probably third cousin or more distant. My third cousin once removed, I think. My fourth cousin, then a guy who I can't figure out the relationship to. Fourth cousin once removed, third cousin, fourth cousin. So the ones at the top of the list, if you have a good family tree, you'll figure out how they're related to you. If they have a good family tree, they might figure it out for you. They might have information on your grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents that you don't have. And on the main GetMatch menu, you can pay GetMatch. These are grayed out because my subscription expired the other day. You can pay a monthly subscription to get the most sophisticated tools, but as a free subscriber, you can get that one-to-many list. You can do a one-to-one comparison between two people in the database. You can look for the matches in common between two people in the database, or you can even check whether your own parents were related. If there's a segment on your paternal chromosome that matches a segment on your maternal chromosome, that means your parents were distantly related. Same thing, Family Tree DNA. I'm just going to fly through these because I want to go through the case study. I think this is the one I want to log in as. And you get the same sort of list of matches. These are my closest matches. I have about 3,704 matches in this database. Again, myself, my twin, my first cousin, first cousin, first cousin, first cousin once removed, more or less the same people. And it tells me the date I was matched with them, which is useful to know whether it's a new match or not, an estimated relationship, total amount of DNA shared, and I can tell it the actual relationship if I know it. And the nice thing over here is it shows the ancestral surnames for each match, and if there's an ancestral surname in common, it highlights it in boldface. So you can immediately tell that's my cousin on the Durkin side, that's my cousin on the O'Connor side, that's my cousin on the McNamara side, or whatever. Ancestry DNA has a similar list. Again, it'll load up eventually. These are my matches. I don't have as many close relatives on Ancestry DNA because when it set up first, it didn't even accept DNA from outside the United States, which was a pretty dumb policy if it wanted to help people to find their ancestors. So I have nobody closer than a second cousin there. And it has all sorts of ability to, only introduced in the last few weeks, to put people in groups and mark them with coloured dots, which I use to indicate which side of the family they're related on. Again, my top 4 matches have no family tree information up there. The next one has a tree but hasn't indicated which person in the tree the DNA belongs to. But there will be people who have family trees properly set up which will be useful to you. My heritage is similar. You've got to have a family tree with your DNA to help people. There's a link at the bottom of this presentation telling you all the details of what to do with it. So I've shown you most of those things. Basic rules. You can't hope to identify your anonymous ancestors if you anonymize yourself. At least reveal the surname of the person whose DNA you're using. Make sure you put the right gender in. Don't put a female name in for a Y-DNA sample because that will really confuse people. If you want to keep things private, you don't have to give out your first name, you don't have to give out your adopted name, your married name, your marital status, none of that helps, but pseudonyms do not attract the attention of potential cousins the way your surname would if they had your surname in their family tree. And try and manage your correspondence, which will grow and grow and grow in a way that you can search it quickly to see who's the other match on the McNamara side that I corresponded with 2 years ago. So I'm going to take the last 5 or 10 minutes to fly through the story of the Lynch family of Moveen West. Moveen is the townland my grandmother was born in County Clare, out on the Loophead Peninsula. That's the River Shannon flowing out into the Atlantic, and Moveen is this beautiful, desolate place on the cliffs. Don't ever go to the Cliffs of Moher. The Cliffs of Moveen are much nicer. And I've been taking down information about local history and genealogy there for about 40 years now, so I say these people are remembered in the oral tradition. Well, they were when I started taking notes years ago. 2 brothers, Pádraig Mór Nance and Tomás Mór Nance. In rural Ireland, we used typically patronymics if there were 2 people. There were 2 Patrick Lynches or 2 Tom Lynches. They want some other nickname to distinguish them. In this case, they used their mother's name, Maura. If we look at Griffith's valuation, we see her listed as an occupier, so it seems she was widowed at a young age. That's why they took a matronymic rather than a patronymic. She was one of 2 sisters between whom this farm was split, and eventually I think she got it all back again. And her son Patrick, this is the Griffith's valuation map, her son Patrick at the time of Griffith's valuation was newly married, living down here. His mother was a widow, living up here, still the head of that household. They had another brother, Daniel, who went to Connecticut, where lots of people from West Clare went. He's buried in a rather famous or infamous place called Sandy Hook. We actually have a Facebook group dedicated to all the people from West Clare who emigrated to Fairfield County and other parts of Connecticut. And our cover photo on this Facebook group, the top of the page here, is Daniel Lynch's tombstone. Daniel Lynch, and the stonecutter spelt it wrong, born in Morveen, County Clare, Ireland, died 1903, aged 65 years. That's how we got his parents' names, because I found a matching death certificate which confirms his Lynch father was Michael Lynch, the husband of the widow in Griffith's valuation. His mother, the widow Mary, was Mary O'Dea. So back about 3 years ago, I'm running this Clare Roots project. I get a donation from one of the enthusiastic members to go towards the test cost for a descendant of the Moveen West Lynch families. So I walked into the local butcher shop down in West Clare to the butcher, who I sort of know, who's my distant cousin, and said, would your wife be willing to give a DNA sample if she got a free DNA test? Which he probably thought I was coming in to buy a pork chop or something. He said, no, I'm sure she would. And gave her a ring, and she said, not at all. So I called round to their house, and I handed her the cheek swabs, and we got her DNA, and her distant cousin in California paid for it. And actually some of the Lynches stole into this glass, and they were sitting in the back of the room. And this is the story of what the Lynches in California, who appeared at the same time, knew. They knew nothing. Our grandfather, Eugene Lynch, is such a mystery to us, we really don't know how to find him. All we have for certain is the 1910 census, and the 1910 census isn't even certain because he abandoned his family around the time of the 1910 census, and the story is he abandoned his pregnant wife. She gave birth 4 days after she filled in the census form. For respectability, she may have put down the name of her delinquent husband, who may have already been gone. If he wasn't, he went very soon afterwards. All they knew was he was born somewhere in Ireland. So when the butcher's wife's results came back, I looked at them, and this is the sort of result you get on chromosome 8 from location 8 million to 54 million, 50 centimorgans, which is a very good match, 10,000 SNP mutations. Claire and Ed were matches. Claire and Ed, I know their pedigree, they're fourth cousins. Their most recent common ancestor is the Mr. O'D, whose farm was divided between his two daughters. One is descended from his daughter, Mrs. Lynch. The other is descended from his daughter, Mrs. O'Connell. So this DNA segment that they both share must be an OD segment that came to them from their shared great-great-great-grandparents. One of their shared great-great-great-grandparents. But the exciting thing was exactly the same segment, or at least the middle part of it, from 17 million to 38 million, was shared by both Ed and Claire with Michael Lynch in California, the grandson of this Eugene Lynch, who appeared out of nowhere and disappeared equally mysteriously. So now I was able to say to the California Lynches, your grandfather is from this Lynch family of Moveen. The DNA tells us that Eugene Lynch must be related to the O'Ds. The fact that his surname is Lynch tells us he's surely descended from the O'D daughter who married a Lynch husband. And he's too young to be Michael Lynch and Mary O'D's son. He was only 41 in the 1910 census, and their other children were born 25, 30 years before him. And he's not in the parish registers, which go back to 1852, so if he's from that parish, he's born before 1852. But there's so much DNA shared, as I can show you in this matrix, that he can't be any more distantly related than a grandson of Michael Lynch and Mary O'D. I'll move this one. So this is a matrix. The numbers are a bit small for you to see. The top 8 rows are the Lynches from California, 7 siblings and their first cousin. The remaining rows are the other descendants of the Moveen Lynches. The number in each row and column is the number of centimorgans shared by one with the other. So this was the interesting one, 209 centimorgans shared by Michael Lynch with another Lynch descendant who couldn't be any closer than a third cousin once removed, and that's well up at the top of the scale for a third cousin once removed relationship. So we're sure where he fits in the family. We know his grandparents. Now we just have to figure out which of their children was his father, because he's a Lynch and the grandparents are Lynch. And we tried and we tried and we tried, but before we tried, the Lynches booked their flight on the next plane. They didn't know in September where in Ireland their ancestors were from. They learned in October, this little townland on the Atlantic coast of Clare, and they came over to Moveen, 6 of them in a group. Eileen sent me this email. It was the highlight of our trip to Ireland. It was an unbelievable gift. I've been wondering and imagining for so long about my grandfather's origins that I can't believe I went there. It was a profound and moving experience for me. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to help people who react like that to what they can find out through DNA, which they would never have found out otherwise. That's episode 1. That's about 2 years ago. since then, we've been swabbing other descendants of the Lynch family to see can we figure out who were Eugene's parents. We know his grandparents. We can't figure out which of their children was his father, as we thought. So now the Lynches are back in Ireland, some of them in the back of the room. And I was back in Moveen with them a couple of weeks ago, and I was driving home that Friday evening, and suddenly I said to myself, we're looking for a male son of Michael Lynch and Mary O'D for 2.5 years, high up and low down in Ireland and California, and we can't find him. Could Eugene Lynch have been using his mother's surname? Well, the first thought was, well, maybe his mother was a single parent, and that's why he took her surname. So I went and I looked to see could I find a single Eugene Lynch born to a single mother in the local workhouse. No joy. But then I said, what about the Y chromosome? We had the Y DNA results of Michael Lynch from California. And I had another look at his matches. So this is what the match list for Y DNA looks like. And because of GDPR, we're supposed to black out the first names of the people on the list in case we'd invade their privacy. And there isn't a single Lynch to be found in that. But there's a Curry there, and there's a Curry there. And I said, Curry is a very common surname around West Clare. I wonder, is that just coincidence? And then I said, hang on. Michael Lynch and Mary O'D had a daughter who married a Curry. So I said, let's look at Eugene's matches on the 67 marker test, the cheaper test. And some of these people have bought 111 markers and should appear in the other list. But here's a guy, I've blocked him out completely. He's an adoptee. He's a 67 marker match. When we went back and checked with him, he has recently discovered that his male line ancestry, his genetic ancestry is Curry. Here's a Corey, that's how they pronounce Curry in West Clare. Another Curry, and another one down here. So I said, he doesn't look like a Lynch. There's no Lynches and there's lots of Currys. And then I said, the guy who we can't trace is Eugene. Eugene Curry, Eugene O'Curry. Has anyone heard of Eugene O'Curry?
Yeah.
Yeah? Exactly, and the main street in Kilkee is called O'Curry Street after him. He was the professor of, what was it called, history or Irish or something in the Newman's First University in the mid-1800s. There's his Wikipedia page, there's his picture. So I said to myself, could this delinquent in California be called after the famous professor? Obviously he's not the same guy. This guy's born 1794. The guy we're looking for is born around late 1860s. This is what we call an NPE, not the parent expected. So we have a post on RootsWeb from about 15 years ago from a lady in California who was descended from another Eugene Curry from Lislanahan, just outside Kilkee, about 4 or 5 miles from Moveen. And he went to Connecticut and then he went to Brooklyn. And she begins by wondering, is he related to the professor whose name he shared? And at the bottom she says, this ancestor has been very elusive. So now this lady was very elusive because RootsWeb and Ancestry have removed the email addresses, and I'd saved her email address years ago, and it turns out that she's changed email, but we've tracked her down. And it turns out, I'm going to start skipping bits, this guy has what they call in England previous. Her Eugene Curry can't be found in the 1900 census. His wife is a live-in servant with a German family in Brooklyn in 1900. She has 2 daughters. One is living with the mother's sister in Brooklyn. The other is living with the father's brother in Connecticut. And the family lore was Eugene Curry went west to find fame and fortune and would send for his family at a later date. He was never heard from again. Is this the Eugene Lynch that we're looking for? And I said that the main reason that we thought that he had to be of the Moveen Lynches is he shared this huge 209 centimorgans with a lady that appeared to be at best his 3rd cousin once removed. And that's right above the top of the scale. It didn't seem right. But we said, there's 8 of them and 20 of the others, and one number just out of the range is probably plausible. It turns out that that lady is not a 3rd cousin once removed. She's a 2nd cousin once removed. The autosomal DNA also makes sense. So this was a bit staggering and mind-boggling for me and for all the descendants, but over the last couple of weeks, I think we've convinced everyone that this is actually what happened. And as a sideline, I met up with Eileen last Tuesday, and I told her contact this other DNA match who matches all the Lynches, and it turned out he was in Dublin and he came in to meet us and he was adopted. And we introduced him to his aunt yesterday. So you can have all sorts of weird little externalities, extra benefits from having your DNA analyzed that you might never have expected. So time is out. I could talk all night about that case and other cases. There's a reading list which you can follow, and if anyone is interested in swabbing who hasn't done already, I have some kits here and we can do it here and now, or you can take one away with you.